Hello everybody, my name is Roxtus.
And I'm Soulkill.
And welcome back to Warframe.
Woo!
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Alrighty. So, I just wanted to quickly go through some of the arsenal and just kind of show through the weapons that we currently have and how we mod them out. And then just kind of going over just the actual game itself. So, let's dive in. So first, I'm just going to go over each of the primary, secondary, and the secondary weapon that we have, the melee as well. We're just going to be looking at mainly the mods and just kind of going over those. Same thing with the Sentinel, kind of what the mods we use there are, and kind of the main type of weapons that we use and kind of what the meta is currently just for us. So starting off with melee, I use between the Fragger Prime and also using the Magistar. So those two weapons are going to be the main type of weapons. And the main reason behind this is because of Fragger Prime's high critical chance and its high critical multiplier. Being at 2.5 critical multiplier is pretty good. Just like I said about Excalibur's Skana Prime, the Skana Prime is at a 2.6 times critical multiplier, so it is pretty good. I believe the Skana kind of comes close to the Fragger, but not quite as close. And the Magistar actually takes the lead in this case because of the stupid Incarnon. The Incarnon shouldn't make a Prime weapon more ridiculous. This because of the stupid Incarnon, I can't say that enough, just makes it so that the critical damage off of this does way more than a basic weapon. But I'm just going to show what I have the Fragger, because I did do a pretty good Riven roll for this, and the Fragger is a pretty good stamp for a weapon. So with this weapon, it does have 40% critical chance on a base. It's very, very good at criticals. The critical multiplier is a 2.5 times, and the status is not bad at 18%. For this, we are just mainly looking at critical damage. As a multiplier, you can, with your melee weapons, go with a status type build, going with a viral type build, but I just find for especially critical does a lot of damage. You can get from, instead of a 4.25 times critical viral times multiplier, which viral, you have to proc viral enough times to get it up. So you have to be wailing on that opponent anyway to get your viral off. With critical, you gain it instantaneously as long as your combo multiplier is high enough. So for melee weapons in particular, I do not use charged attacks or heavy attacks in this case. I do not use charged attacks for these type of weapons. I use a weapon more so in its significance for just meleeing all the time, just doing basic auto attacks. Instead of losing all of my combo counter, I just use it for the basic attacks. So for the Fragger Prime, I use Organ Shatter as with any weapon with a high critical multiplier. This does significantly well, changing your 2.5 times critical multiplier to 7.9 times, as I've said with viral. This goes way beyond viral. This does more damage than any status type weapon on a base. And as we're not using heavy attacks, this is a constant form of damage where we're just pulling out millions out of our pockets, basically dealing quite a bit of damage all the time. For critical chance, we want Blood Rush. I know for a fact this does do quite a bit. If you're thinking, oh, okay, well, it just adds 40%. But yes, but it stacks with your combo multiplier, meaning that at the very end of things, it does 5.4 or 4.4 times added critical chance. So because the Fragger has a 40% critical chance on a base, this just adds additive, a whole bunch of critical chance, basically taking it from the yellow tier at 100% critical chance, going to orange tier at 200% critical chance, going to the red tier at, I believe, 300% critical chance. And this stacks really, really well, especially with if you're using Frost, with Biting Frost, because of the critical chance and the critical damage as well. Because if the weapon has a high critical chance or a high critical damage multiplier, this stacks really, really well, giving you even higher critical multiplier and a higher critical chance, giving your critical tier from reds to even higher. So I don't know what the math is behind that. I probably could look it up and do a whole bunch of math behind it, but it does do significant damage, especially given the critical chance and the critical multiplier and the critical tier off of that critical chance. So very, very good in terms of criticals. Because of this, we're also going to be going Sacrificial Steel. This adds another 220%, so half of what Blood Rush gives, we're going to be getting back. As with this weapon, I would not go sacrificial pressure. You're actually getting more damage off of primed pressure point for the melee damage. Do not go sacrificial pressure. Primed pressure point is going to be your better one. I do have a riven for this to take instead of primed pressure point. So I do have 225 melee damage. So if it were not to have a riven mod here, I would be using primed pressure point. Fragger, this gives you huge amounts of melee damage. And for this riven mod, it is beautiful, adding 124.9% critical damage. This is almost essentially having another, I believe, third of the organ shatter onto this weapon. So this is super huge. This is basically like adding on a secondary organ shatter. So this is wonderful. It just gives you a ton of critical damage, which in end effect adds a ton of damage. Primed Fever Strike, this basically just gets multiplied into your base damage. Right now, the base weapon damage on this weapon doesn't even hit, well, let's see here, 300. So it does hit 1,000 damage, but the toxin damage based upon primed Fever Strike is going to be higher than the base weapon damage. So just because we're adding on primed Fever Strike here, we are going more than double, or actually 1.65 times the weapon's base damage here, adding on primed Fever Strike. So this is huge. Basically, it adds over double our weapon damage on a base. So this is huge. This adds tons of damage. For the base attack speed, we don't want to be going attack speed low. We want to be going pretty quick because the attack speed is pretty poor on the Fragger Prime. So we'll be using Quickening and Primed Fury. Alongside attack speed, the base skin on this weapon also adds 5% attack speed. Even though it's not much, it does add a little bit of something. And Conditioned Overload. If we can get our statuses off, each status will add 80% additive damage. This is really good. You can use, if you want, Weeping Wounds, because this will up your status just like Blood Rush. But I find that the 20% status chance is just significant enough, so where I'm just dealing high critical damage all the time. And then if I get one of those statuses off, that Conditioned Overload adds more damage. And or if I have other things that are proccing statuses, such as an ability, cold, or anything else, those statuses will also get procced by Conditioned Overload again. So Conditioned Overload, yes, but most of the time, this toxin damage is going to just straight up kill most things anyway, especially Corpus. So very, very good. Another weapon too that you can use, and currently probably in the top of its tier, is Magistar. Reaper Prime is the same type of build. Every single one of these is the same type of build, I should say. Straight off from the bat, you have, of course, your criticals here. You have your, of course, critical damage. This adds a little bit of attack speed. I didn't get a very good roll on this Riven, but you do get Primed Pressure Point. This takes the stead of Quickening. This takes Primed Fury, and then, of course, Conditioned Overload and Primed Fever Strike. This is about the same damage as the Fragger Prime. So not too much difference there. You got a 2.5 times critical multiplier. It has a little bit less critical chance, but it has better status for doing Conditioned Overload. So that, in this terms, the Reaper Prime is pretty good. But I tend to use actually the Magistar because of the stupid Incarnon on this weapon. But I do come back sometimes to the Reaper Prime because its attack speed is pretty high at 1.08. But for the Magistar, we're going to be looking at the meta type weapon that does a ton of damage. Now on a base, this weapon actually has a 2 times critical multiplier. Because of the stupid Incarnon that someone had an idea of, oh, let's add another critical tier to this thing does more damage than the Fragger Prime. This is ridiculous. Just talking about basic auto attacks. We're never ever doing heavy attacks. I never resort to heavy attacks because I just don't like using heavy attacks. That's just me. But this thing adds a whole bunch of just different stats. This adds added attack speed, 40% added attack speed. So that's wonderful because hammers are usually generally pretty slow. This adds range. This also adds, on a base without having to do anything else, increase your critical chance by 16%, which is pretty good. And it increases your critical damage multiplier by 1 times. Now this takes your critical multiplier on a base from 2 to 3. So currently this, per the meta, I believe does the best damage based upon that. Just that alone, it does super high amounts of damage. just because of that critical damage multiplier. I don't believe any other weapon on a base, other than if you're heavy attacking, maybe if you're heavy attacking, that would do even more damage. But this does substantially well because of the critical damage multiplier being at 3. So for this one, we're also going to be doing the same thing as pretty much the Fragger Prime. We're adding Crushing Ruin. Of course, I love Crushing Ruin. Crushing Ruin is such a good stance overall. And then we're adding on a whole bunch of critical chance. Of course, same thing as Fragger Prime. Primed Fever Strike, quickening for the attack speeds, and Primed Fury, Conditioned Overload for proccing those statuses. And I pretty much hit a very good jackpot Riven right here, adding about 200% melee damage, 120% critical damage, and 1.55 times damage to Grenier, which on a base is wonderful, especially if you're dealing with Grenier, which Grenier are the main tanky ones here in this game. So these two Rivens in and of themselves are very optimum. This one actually probably takes the cake because it gains that bonus damage to Grenier. This is huge, especially because Grenier are pretty much the toughest unit in this game, alongside some of the other ones, which, Sentients are pretty hard, and some of the other ones are pretty hard, but mainly the melee damage and the critical damage. I love these two Rivens. These do phenomenal. But if you don't have this, I would put on Primed Pressure Point instead of Sacrificial Pressure. I put on that Pressure Point just for adding on more melee damage. But
I don't have a Riven mod.
Yeah. But other than that, this weapon right now, just because of the stupid Incarnon, makes this the top tier weapon currently, I believe. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's pretty good. I haven't really used heavy attacks because heavy attacks for me are encumbering and really just annoying to use. I do not like using heavy attacks. I like using just the basic auto attacks. So keep that in mind when you're looking at my type of builds, because I do not use heavy attacks whatsoever. I just love the basic damage and being able to have a form of consistent damage across the table when looking at my melee weapons. So this type of a build for the Magistar, Fragger Prime, or the Reaper Prime goes across even my Broken War or some of the other weapons that also have pretty good bases. I do love the Broken War. The Broken War is a pretty fun little weapon. I can't wait to see what this would do on a Skana Prime, as I am not a founder. I don't know what that would look like, but I would love to actually wield the Skana Prime. That is something that is on my dream bucket list that I would love to actually see. But I mean, we'll see in the future what happens with that. That would be interesting to see. But this is the type of build I would use for your melee weapon. For your secondary, there are a lot of secondary weapons in this game. A lot of the secondary weapons are pretty meh. They're not as good as your primary weapons. Your primary weapons are going to be your main ones for dealing damage. This, for your secondary, I look more as a utility type weapon. I went through a whole bunch of different type of weapons and I was like, even the nuker is kind of like, meh, it's not that great. But I look at the Haiku as kind of more of a utility type weapon. It's very useful for just in general. If I walk into a room and there's a ton of caches, I want to be able to pop this and hit all those caches and get all the resources from those caches, instead of, I'm going to take my melee weapon and go around the room and ground slam everything, which is what you'd usually do. I want to be able to walk in the room and be able to pop the entire room and be able to get all my stuff back. And alongside that, if you have Equinox or if you have something like Rhino, those are annoying nullifiers. You don't want to be around those nullifiers. Rhino's saying no right now. I do not like nullifiers. So we are actually going to be going for a duality build between nullifiers and also clearing rooms. The Haiku is very useful for this because of its high attack speed rate and because of its magazine, and +2, it is a silent type weapon. So all of those things in mind, this is a very good weapon just for clearing rooms and for taking out nullifiers. I am using quite a few different things here, but the main thing you need to know is concealed explosives. This is a little bit better than the bow type explosive, where Thunderbolt, I believe, Thunderbolt, let's see here, how much does Thunderbolt go up to? Thunderbolt goes up to a 30% chance to explode and use caution. So it does do a 30% chance to explode. But when you are looking at concealed explosives, it has an 80% chance to explode. Use with caution. So this is really, really good. This has a huge area of effect. I think it's like 12 or 10 meters. So this is really good for just clearing those rooms or hitting multiple nullifiers in this case, and just being able to pop everything in the area. We use Primed Expel Corpus and Primed Expel Corrupted here because nullifiers are only in those two fractions alongside Narmer, but there is no real Narmer mods currently for this. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check that, but I don't think there's any Narmer fraction mods for the secondary. So these two are the main ones that we're going to be using for up against nullifiers, as these I do believe do bonus damage towards nullifier shields. So this is very useful. We are using mainly multi-shot, as per each of those nullifier shields, they per instance of damage are only taking so much damage per instance. So having a fast attack speed and having multi-shot just really drains those nullifier bubbles very, very quickly. So that's the main things that you kind of want to focus on there, is attack speed rate or fire rate and multi-shot, just to get those bubbles down. So we have galvanized diffusion, lethal torrent as well for multi-shot and fire rate. So these are both very good. I have a Riven mod here, evidently with basically a Hornet Strike, but also with adding 154% multi-shot. So this for me is wonderful because I can just take out a whole bunch of nullifier orbs very, very quickly. And Primed Heated Charge just for adding a little bit of damage here on the side. This does really well just for killing things straight up if it's low level, depending on if it's low level or not. And Primed Fulmation, which improves the blast radius of concealed explosives. So this, I believe, goes up to like 15 meters in range or something like that, which is really good to be able to just pop a huge area. We use Trick Mag for added ammo maximum. If you can, you could potentially be able to max it out, but as I have basically the same polarity for every single slot and I can't put anything more on here, this is going to be my one to go for, especially for the ammo maximum, just to make sure I don't run out of ammunition. Secondary dexterity, I do use this. It just adds a little bit more damage just for nullifiers, I guess, but it really doesn't matter too much. I don't really pay too much mind to those. A lot of farming that has to go in to any arcanes, and we haven't really gotten into the new area to get any melee arcanes, so we will be looking forward to maybe getting some. It does take a long time to farm for arcanes, I just gotta say straight up, and I don't really feel comfortable taking a huge amount of time out of my day to go farm a whole bunch of arcanes, especially with the farming system I know DE probably sets up, and maybe it's easy to get up a hold of those things, but I don't feel like taking a lot of time to do that. For our primaries, it depends on your primary weapon. Some weapons are different depending on if it's a status type weapon, like the Ignis. It depends on what type of weapon. If it's a shotgun, if it does more AoE damage, it depends on what type of weapon you're looking at. But mainly, if you're looking for a Eidolon hunting gun, you're going to be looking at something like the Rubico, and I'm just kind of going to go over this. It's just multi-shot, adding damage, critical damage, and of course more multi-shot, some heat, and definitely radiation. I believe there is radiation on this, yes. So this is a good one just for taking out Eidolons. There are other builds, but this is the main build that we go for just taking out Eidolons. If you are looking for overall just straight up damage, they released this bow. This is super annoying because any other weapon in the game now completely feels useless because this bow does so much damage. It's just ridiculous. But here's just a general build for this: multi-shot, added crit, just different things, just depending on what type of weapon it is. It's kind of the same build, not too much different for it. And then of course the Ignis, this is for mainly just running missions, hitting a whole bunch of enemies and opponents. This mainly does status chance, but it does have a pretty decent critical multiplier on it as well. So we're going for viral for this one. We're adding heat, quite a bit of critical chance and critical damage, more multi-shot, pretty much kind of like the same builds, and sinister reach for added beam range. This is a pretty good overall build. There are other builds of, as I have mentioned, but this does take the cake, and you really want to take advantage of that primed cryo range, especially for the viral. So that's pretty good there. Yeah, and then of course I do love like my Sobek. My Sobek is pretty fun just to use a shotgun just for multi-shot. Pretty quick build here for that. We use a lot of these primed mods here. It doesn't have very good critical chance, so we really don't go into that all that much, but mainly for status types. And acid shells does do quite well on this type of a weapon. So there's this build here for you guys. I believe this adds just multi-shot, so this is really just overall just a good shotgun type build. And then like the heck is wonderful for archons. If you're doing archons, this is your best weapon for you. You want to take a look into like adding critical, adding multi-shot, not adding on, I believe, galvanized hull. You want to be using galvanized chamber because you're not getting kills consistently, but this one is really good just for pretty much just taking out the archons. This is a really good build for that. It just depends on what type of weapon you really need, what the situation is, what your scenario is. And then for me, I love these little plinkers. These little plinkers are a really fun type of gun because they're pinpoint precision, pretty much just like a Snipertron or any sniper type weapon, but they also operate as a rifle. So they have a higher ammo maximum than any of your basic sniper rifles. Your basic sniper rifles do not have a very good ammo maximum. These ones have a very good ammo maximum and they have very good critical chance. So this adds up to just being a very good plinker. Although throughout the gameplay, I wish there was a little bit more for these type of weapons. I wish they did a little bit better than they currently do. They are pretty good in their current state, but they do just kind of fall off. I love them though. They're just such fun. Like if I could take a plinker out and use it, these two are really good, fun weapons to use. The overall build for this, I do have some ribbons for these as well, and the same thing for the Latron. Just a kind of a general build. I add critical chance as well for these. This can get up to 10 times critical multiplier. Let's see here what this one's can get up to. This one can get up to 6.4, so not as good as something like the Latron. The Latron Prime, I do believe, is kind of a fun one, but I love them both. They're both pretty good weapons. Super Vandal, I use this mainly for just kind of like hitting a wide area of effect. I wish it was as effective as the Ignis. The Ignis is just better as it is a beam type weapon and can hit a huge area of effect of those rooms. The Subra is more so just like a planker. It just hits a whole bunch of different things. Its accuracy is pretty poor, but I wish I could use it. Same thing as the Ignis. It's just not as good as something like the Ignis, but here's just a general build for that. And the Lake Lanka is really good for mag and using her bubbles. If you want something with a really high punch through, this is something that's very good and very well paired with mag for that high punch through. And here's just a general build for this. I have a ton of ribbons. I get a pretty good few rerolls on these different ribbons, but this is the main type of build I use for this. Me mainly want to be going status chance because I believe for some odd reason that status chance works really well with the punch through just to be able to kill things because of the viral. You can just proc viral over and over and over again, and it gives you a pretty good, decent critical multiplier here. So just a general overall build for this, but it is interesting. The status seems to actually do better than using critical on this type of weapon if you're using it for bubbles. So very interesting on that type of a weapon. Some things to note. I wish that other bows were as useful. This currently is the meta weapon. This just currently just demolishes anything in its path. It's just ridiculous how overpowered this thing is. This thing just does a ton of damage. I didn't know the critical multiplier was awful on this thing. 1.8. Maybe they nerfed it. But it just, I don't know why, but like they really just buffed this thing up to just be ridiculous. I don't know if it still currently is, but it really seems ridiculous. One weapon that I would love to use, but is just awful in the current state, is the Opticore. The Opticore, just like the Natarek, just feels so good in your hands, does a ton of damage, and then the Opticore just, I wish I could use it, and I wish it was a BFG, but it just isn't. It's one of those things where it's just like, man, I wish it was usable, but I usually use any other weapon. I think my favorite one out of the bunch is probably going to be the Latron Prime, along with the Ignis. The Ignis is usable on any mission. The Ignis would be your number one go-to for any mission. Most of your missions, you're going to be running that. But the Latron Prime, I wish, just, it feels so good, and it works so well. But because there's so many enemies in these rooms, you're usually using the Ignis. So this is the number one that you come to. And the number two for Eidolons, for pure damage, would be this weapon. For if you're using something like Mag for her bubbles, this is pretty useful. But again, nullifiers can just nullify those bubbles, and it just kind of doesn't work as well as you would think it does. Supra just is kind of like an Ignis, but just is worse. Overall, it's just worse. And then kind of beyond that, we use this for Archons, but I don't really kill a lot of Archons, but this does really do wonders for Archons. And then, of course, Sobek. I do love this weapon just for just clearing rooms. It's pretty fun. It's about the same as Ignis. It does it pretty well, but then it does kind of fall off later. Still pretty good. There are some other weapons in here as well that are pretty good as well. But the main weapon that everyone keeps on coming back to, because it's so reliable, is a flamethrower.
Love my flamethrower.
Because it's so good. It is so good. So we're actually going to just keep on this one. But I'd have to say for me, the Latron Prime is a very, very fun one. It's something I just keep on coming back to because it's just a little plinker, and I love it for just being a little plinker. And that's our main weapons there. Not too much to note there. Just high critical damage, area of effect, and of course, whatever weapon you need, just based upon your scenario. So area of effect, as I've already said, and of course, Archons being the main ones that you kind of want to take a look at. For Sentinels, we kind of operate between 3 different ones. You could also say 4 different ones, but does the Nautilus actually do anything useful?
He repairs breaches
Oh, that's all he does. So he's not really
on the
useful.
railjack.
So
Yeah.
main ones that we use are Helios, Oculus, and Carrier, which Carrier really kind of falls off. But the main ones we use are going to be Helios and Oculus. And these are basically the same type of builds. We're looking mainly for survivability with these type of frames. We're going to be looking at calculated redirection, shields, armor, health, and then spare parts to basically get your spare parts back, which is pretty useful. If your unit dies, you just get really good spare parts. Actually, no, they changed this. This scans and makes everyone drop more drops. So this is really, really useful, especially with the revamp that they did with this. This is really useful.
Oh.
Meta Ray gets your health back. Really, really useful. Repair Kit, getting your companion's health back, which basically heals your Helios for free. Vacuum to get all your mods and everything else collected. This is very, very useful. The number one mod that you want to use on any of your other dudes. But the main thing here is just basically for survival, being able to heal yourself, being able to heal your companion, and of course, getting some spare parts out of that. Primed Animal Instinct. For loot radar and enemy radar, this works very, very well just for sensing what's in these rooms and how many things are in the rooms, and just overall just sense, just being able to tell what is around you. Primed Regen for just basically getting your Sentinel back. They did revamp this, so I'm super happy about that. That is nice that basically Sentinels never die now, because Sentinels are very vital and very useful for just overall using vacuum.
Yeah.
Investigator for Helios will be his main one that we use. I believe he has other augments as well. Yes. So he does have some other augments as well, but just not as useful as something like Investigator, where he basically scans objects and enemies within 50 meters. And this just adds into your codex, so you actually can get those procs and be able to understand those different units. So this is really good just going throughout the environment. Him being able to scan everything is useful. This is the main utility that Helios brings to the table when you actually get him. Detect vulnerability is just, it's okay. You could use it. But other than that, I mainly just use Investigator. Investigator usually takes out the main majority of scanning in and of itself. Then we have Oculus. Oculus in and of himself is just kind of like a fisherman, but pretty much the same build that we were looking at for Helios, but then instead of that augment, Oculus has his own usage. He reveals hotspots within 100 meters and applies luminous dye to fish within 40 meters. So this is really useful, especially on plains of Eidolon, just for pretty much being able to fish, and that's it. I do believe he does, yes. Botanist. So he'll scan plants. So this is also another use for him. And if you're going throughout planets and you're like, hey, I need something for Silver Grove or, anything of that sort, you can just pop on Botanist and use Botanist instead of scan aquatic life forms. So this is pretty useful, especially if you need plants, but most of the time we're just using him for fishing. Scan matter, resource containers are revealed. This is not useful. Don't worry about that one. That just does what Primed Animal Instinct does to even begin with, and Primed Animal Instinct is much better for that. So don't even worry about that. Carrier Prime, I wish this was a lot more useful, but it's the same build as Helios, except for Looter. Looter destroys loot crates within 12 meters. Now this is actually what we use the Haiku for most of our missions, to be able to pop a ton of loot crates. This is awful because it takes a long time for it to reproc itself, and the meter area is only 12 meters. Same thing as vacuum. This is just not as useful because it takes such a long time for Helios or Carrier to decide to finally pop those crates. And a lot of the time it's just less useful. The range on this should be extended to even further range, and it's just not. So for Carrier, this really just sucks to be Carrier right now. I do not believe, ammo case. So this converts extra ammo pickups to different weapon types. So this just kind of sucks for Carrier because he doesn't really have a very good use for himself. The main two that we usually use are just going to be Helios and Oculus. Oculus and Helios do a very good job of just scanning, and of course Oculus does that fishing, so he's pretty useful there. But the main one we use throughout the entire tile sets is mainly going to be Helios. He's pretty much the same and constant that we use all the time. Gear, not too much here. We just basically whatever the game requires us to put on, we put on just to be able to use. When we are looking at something in here, this is pretty good. Archwings and other weapons as well. So for the Archwing, we're pretty much going for defense, energy, armor. Flight speed is pretty useful here. Ability efficiency and ability strength. Both of these are very, very good. And ability duration with shield recharge and shield delay. So, that adds shield capacity. This is a pretty good build. You can use other things as well, but this is my build. I don't really pay too much mind to it because a lot of the time you're not paying too much mind to what's actually happening in Archwing. Archwing is one of those that you kind of use it some of the time, but most of the time you're just not using it. The main thing that I worry about though for Archwing is going to be the Jordis Golem. This assassination is a very hard one, and if you need a weapon to be able to take it out, pretty much the Grattler, the Kuva Grattler, is going to be your friend.
Oh, yeah.
The base Grattler is also really, really good for this. But the main thing that we're looking at for the Grattler is it is very good, again, with the Haiku for clearing rooms. It has a huge blast radius. It's very good at hitting the entire room, popping crates, popping other things, and or doing multi-shot basically via the blast damage and hitting all those units in the area of effect. I would not use any other type of weapon. I have already used every single arch gun, including this one in the game, and I highly recommend using the Grattler. Grattler is my go-to for any mission if it requires any Archwing gun or anything like that. Electrified barrel, venomous clip, we get a whole bunch of corrosive off of that. Critical damage, critical chance, added base damage, add heat. This does really, really well. And of course, our base augment for this Kuva weapon is going to be radiation. Radiation does really, really well, especially at higher levels. And then of course, critical focus. This adds more critical chance and critical damage. And then dual rounds for multi-shot. This is just a very good build overall, just for clearing rooms and for getting through that golem fight that golem fight is a really hard one, and this makes it so that it goes really, really quick. Prism Vertex, if you have any melee weapon, especially the Nux, this takes a lot of cry to actually build. This is annoying. But if you have any type of melee weapon, the main weapon that we use, we don't even use all that much.
I don't use melee weapons.
We do not use. This is awful in Archwing. We don't use that at all. We mainly look at the Grattler for doing our heavy lifting, and the Grattler is a very good one. K-Drive just depends on what you want your K-Drive to be spec'd out with. Nothing too much, honestly, here. It's just if you like using your K-Drive or not, which it's not part of main gameplay, so we don't really pay attention to, but it is fun when you want to just kind of go around the area. Void Rig, I would use the Void Rig. Don't use the Bone Widow. Bone Widow is just a degraded form of Void Rig. The Void Rig is mainly used for that guard mode. The guard mode does a ton of damage area of effect. So this is a very good frame for using that. I just generically add on power strength or whatever I can onto this. You have multiple polarity slots on this thing. You can mod it out however you want. Mainly for you, Soul, you use jump height, which kind of fudges you over some cases, and in other cases I'm like, I want to jump up there, and you're standing up there.
I know it kind of does, but I love jumping high.
Oh yeah, but the amount of forma you have to put on these type of weapons is ridiculous. So again, just kind of depends on whatever you need or whatever you want for these type of weapons. We usually don't use them all that much. And of course, the Archwing, which is the exalted weapon for the Void Rig, which is really good. I'm pretty much looking at the same build that you would use for the Grattler. So nothing too much different here. We're pretty much doing the same thing. I believe the only thing we're missing here is heat. No. What's the other thing that we're missing on the Grattler here? We're missing dual rounds. Dual rounds? No, critical focus.
We got dual rounds, yeah.
Critical focus is the only thing that's missing here. So that's pretty much the same build as the Grattler. Don't worry too much about that. But yeah, for Archwing, we don't really use it all that much. And if you are struggling to get your Archwing weapons and other equipment up, there is a very good map to go to. You go Neptune and you go Scala. This is a very good one for getting any of your Archwing weapons and equipment up. It just works. It works very, very well. And it doesn't take very long. It takes about 5 missions or something like that to be able to get your weapons and equipment to max. So that's a really useful one when you're trying to get your Archwings up.
Yeah.
And most of the time, this stuff is just in our back pocket. The main gunna that we use is going to be the Grattler.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's very, very good. I love this thing. It does lots of damage. And even when I was starting out, I actually had the basic Grattler. I loved that thing for doing Uranus missions because you have to dive underneath the water with your Archwing. I love this thing. The two Archwings that I would be taking a focus onto or basically using would be the Ashima and the Ordana Prime. The Ashima is a very good healer type of Archwing.
Which I love using.
Yeah, and the Ordana Prime, which the Ordana Prime gives you the energy shell, which basically does the same thing as if you've watched Volt. It does the same thing as Volt's shield, which gives you, I believe it's a 2 times critical damage multiplier. So this is very, very useful. But other than that, nothing too much to state here. If you want to be able to survive, I would use the Ashima. The Ashima is a very good one, especially for healing. I believe it's the third ability? Fourth ability?
It is...
Second ability.
Let's see.
Second ability, heal.
Yeah, second.
So this is the only Archwing that actually heals. So that's a really good one just for that. But most of the time, we're just using the Ordana Prime. So not much there to do there. But yeah, other than that, that is the arsenal. Just kind of, yeah, meh for this. Everything in this category, just kind of meh, except for the Grattler. The Grattler we do take seriously. The Grattler is something that you really want to just blast through opponents. And the Grattler does it very, very well. The Grattler is the main thing that we use in this entire category, alongside the Void Rig for just the Archwing. The Archwing does a ton of damage and is very useful.
Oh, yeah.
For the Helios, Helios is the main one. I really have experimented kind of a little bit with other things, but I just keep on coming back to Helios because he's just a general utility. He just scans everything. He's very useful. And then, of course, as you know, just whatever the weapon is that you need for your scenario, depending on what conditions you actually need. I hate Archons. This works very well for Archons. But other than that, yeah, that's pretty much it. Shall we go for our mission?
Yes.
All right.
And I'm going to use my flamethrower because I can.
You're going to use your flamethrower.
I see you. Another dead tangle.
Assassination contracts are not to be taken lightly. Enemy forces. Search the area. Leave no surprises. Do not allow this. Get to his location and eliminate him.
You have Gauss.
Yes.
The area is barren.
Okay.
It's Barradoon.
It's Barradoon. Going the wrong way. I'm so fit.
The main thing I like about the Grinlok versus the Latron, though, I'd have to definitely say, is the reload speed. The reload on the Grinlok is way quicker.
Yeah.
Another dead tangle.
Wow! That cutscene was fast.
Yeah.
Your goods will serve us well.
Poke him. And then he keels over. This is not over.
I'm sure it is over.
Oh.
Extraction. Marines inbound. Stay focused. There's a heavy unit approaching.
Spade.
Woo.
All right.
I'm so speedy.
Bothering us anymore. Let's get out of here.
Ooh. And we got the seer.
Woo.
Alrighty. So I know that this video is a little bit speedy and it's just kind of like going through all the different types of weapons, but it really is dependent up to you how you play the game. And I didn't want to spend too much time on the different types of weapons because it really depends how you play the game. If you like using heavy attacks, you can use heavy attacks. If you like using your secondary weapon for damage instead of using it for nullifiers, that's just kind of up to you how you like to play the game. Same thing with your primaries. It's mainly terms and conditions, whatever you like using and for whatever type of mission you're on. And mainly it's useful, especially even Rubico, for Eidolon. So it really depends on what you're using and for what situation. So to that, I just kind of like, yeah, but I just kind of want to whisk over just the different ideas there. So I know it's kind of fast, but also for Helios and some of these other things, I don't feel they're as important as something like the Grattler or something like the Arbiquek or the same thing as Helios. Those things are kind of, for me, a little bit more paramount than everything else. But other than that, yeah, that is what it is. And then, so I wanted to go over Warframes here too, real quick. So these are the different Warframes that we have currently done. We've currently done, and I would have to say, the best Warframes in the game, which are Mag Prime, Frost Prime, and Trinity Prime. Equinox is one of those where it's just kind of like, it's kind of useful, but not as useful as someone like Chroma. Chroma is pretty useful for overall, just all around helping around. And then kind of going down that list, going Equinox, Nyx, Saran, and Valkyr. Those are pretty useful, but it just depends what type of mission you're using them on and how useful they really are. I would have to say the most useful frames that I've ever come across the entire game are Mag, Frost, and Trinity. These are pretty much the paramount ones where are very, very good for whatever mission. Saran would be interesting to see with some more green shards. Valkyrie is a very good one for you early people trying to get through the game. This is a very good frame just for kicking through the game. And then, of course, beyond that are less useful Warframes that don't really hit as high as a mark as some other Warframes. Volt is kind of semi-conditional if you're doing Archon or Eidolons. Volt is very useful as well for different situations. Titania, of course, we've talked about her. And Rhino, pretty good. And then, of course, our even less used Warframes down below, ending up with Excalibur Umbra, or basically Excalibur. So those are the main frames that we use. But yeah, those are the frames that we've done for now. And we'll see about doing some more frames in the future. We just have to see what the potential is for the frames and just general. But I just kind of wanted to go over the game in and as a whole. Warframe is a really good game. You have the three basic things, and I'll just kind of go over these very quickly. Structure, which is mods and Warframes. This is pretty good. This is very good, especially during gameplay or anything else. The frames move around very beautifully. The environment throughout the game is very, very beautiful, but mainly the frames are good. The mods are pretty good. There is some negatives there, though, with especially frames and viability, some weapons as well, as I've mentioned with the Opticore, or even someone like Loki. It just feels like some things don't really have any potential at all. So it would be pretty interesting to see if there wasn't something extra we could add in there to be able to add some more damage. But overall, mainly, most of these frames are pretty good. They're pretty good frames, and overall the gameplay is very, very good. Not a lot of games that you can point to nowadays and go, hey, that's just as good as Warframe. Nah, Warframe's a pretty good game. I haven't seen really a lot of games that hit this level of that Warframe has hit. Really, Warframe has hit quite a few of the marks for me, and it's a pretty good game overall. The system is based upon market, environment, biro, the star chart, the bosses. This is very, very good. Overall, throughout the game, you get to learn about the market. The market is a pretty good utility here, as well as the codex. And of course, going through here, you can learn a little bit more about the universe and just kind of going through just the different things that you can actually learn. Of course, biro is a pretty unique mechanic, and most of the things in the game are a unique mechanic. Very, very good. I love the planets. I love everything about the game in and of the bosses and all of the environment, especially environments. The Void is the most beautiful tile set. If you ever get to the Void is probably the most beautiful tile set out of any of the tile sets. I know Earth, it's like, okay, well, they're even there, or even Deimos. It just is kind of copy paste, and a lot of the time if you don't have very good internet connection, or if you have fully loaded in, even if you fully loaded in, you can tell it's very pixelated. It's very just the graphics aren't there, but it does work. But I just love the Void. Going back to the Void, just beautiful tile sets. Everything in the Void is pretty much top notch. I love that. The only thing about the system that I don't like is the farming. The farming is the number one thing that I think just gates the game and just is just as pain all overall. Even for me, I kind of, I haven't done it yet, but I'm very discouraged on even the Sanctum, because they open up a new area, and every time that they do something like this and then you see, oh, there's more farming, I get discouraged, because I'm just expecting, I don't know if it's true or not, but I'm just expecting a ton of farming to be involved. And that's where I just get discouraged, because every time that something new pops up, I'm just like, oh, how much farming is going to be involved this time? Is it going to be, 30 hours, or is it going to be 2 minutes? So every time I hit something new, and it's just kind of like, I kind of clench my teeth and I go, is it going to be a 20-hour farm, or is it going to be 30? So again, system is beautiful. I love it across the board. Everything is very well done. But the one thing that just is kind of a thorn in Warframe's side and has been ever since is just the farming. And I would have to come back into the game and be able to go through the newer areas and see how much. But for the general, even Necros, quite a few of the other frames takes a ton of time. And that's just a constant pain. That's a constant thorn in its side.
Yeah.
Story is very, very good, whether you're looking at the base Warframe and you're going through, of course, the Void or the basic starting quests, going through War. All the quests are pretty well done. Nothing much to say there, but there is, I'd have to say, kind of these rogue elements that don't piece together the story. It just feels like more of the newer story that comes out, or even some of the other parts of the story just seem to be kind of wild out there, just rogue elements where they're not really connecting. And even with the original idea, the story idea for Warframe, I come back to my statement that I wrote, and it kind of rings true every single time. It's just, when we started the game, especially even from the Orkin or any from the base of the game, it just feels like even after playing the game as for so long, it's curiosity unquenched. We still wander these Orkin halls in search of answers. It's just, I hear that and I go, that kind of rings true for me. I don't know if it rings true for you guys, but like, I'm still questioning the very beginning of the game. I'm still questioning, like, okay, well, how do these other parts come into it? And there is lore. If you read, there is lore throughout the Codex. There is lore throughout, like, the Leviathan, and there are some other pieces of lore that you can gander from other missions. But for the most part, I'm still kind of wandering those halls going, well, where's the main part of the story? Like, we've got all these rogue elements, like from the newer quests and everything else like that. But from the base Warframe going forward, there's just a lot of rogue elements, and we don't have a lot of answers to a lot of the base Warframe story. I'd have to put it like that. It just feels kind of empty. And then from my calculations, we only have 6 years left of Warframe, where they can pump out another 42 Warframes to be released and about 210 equipment left to be released. And my thought is, especially, we have about half time, like the Warframe has started since like 10 years ago or something like that. We only have half that time remaining. What final note will Warframe be making? What note will it end on? And I mean, you can sit there and milk Warframe like I've seen them doing with, they create more Warframes and they'll make more quests and they'll involve more Warframes, but you're just milking Warframe and you're just adding in more Warframes. At the end of that, I don't know how interesting Warframe will be unless you add in some very interesting quests that actually make a living and breathing story that tells a tale. You have to have something that Warframe lives on and doesn't just die over time by just making more and more Warframes. You have to make a very good, satisfactory content. You have to make a very good story that ties in everything. And I'm expecting to see a little bit more story, hopefully, in the future. I mean, we only have 6 years left of Warframe. If you continue to create Warframes on a regular basis, as DE has done, you only have 6 years left. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 6 years or doesn't happen. Just depends on if they actually do anything with Warframe. And I would love to see the potential of that. But just as an ending statement, I hope for Warframe to be a long-standing game that all generations can play. And I believe for me, the number one thing that I just keep on coming into contact with is the most difficult obstacle for Warframe right now is the farming aspect of the game. Just getting new players involved, getting new players interested, and especially because Warframe takes so much time to be able to farm those new frames, those new things. it is kind of a letdown for newer players to take that much time to be devoted into a game. It took me 8 years to finally get to the place I am now. I got other stuff that are on the side that I got to do, but it took me a full 8 years. So kind of hearing that for new players, that it would take you 8 years to finally get to the point that you can get to kind of the end of the game, kind of takes the air out of your life, because that's 8 years of your life that you got to be spending trying to farm, trying to, like, you could make it faster if you were, devoted to farming it, but not everyone has 8 years of half time to spend on this game, and making it so that the game overall farming was faster would make a lot more appeal to newer players, because then they don't have to farm as much or as often. And then I can't wait to see what's with Soulframe. Soulframe, hopefully, as I've said with the story, hopefully there's more that with Soulframe that it either adds into Warframe. Maybe Soulframe is a completely different game than Warframe, but I'd be interested to see in like what the end game is for Warframe, where Warframe is actually going to end up, if it's just going to kind of wander or what's going to happen there. But I can't wait to see what's with Warframe. And for me, my paintbrush and paint are poised, ready to make their mark. Are you ready? And that's pretty much all that I got for Warframe. So there is more potential in the future to see more frames, to see more things that we could potentially do. But as the system is ever changing and we don't know what to expect from Warframe for what's next, I believe we'll just end it here on this note. So yes, thank you all so much for watching. Yes?
Yes.
And we will see you guys in the very next video. Bye.
Bye-bye.